We're going to have Farron kick things off to get started, and then Emily and I will introduce ourselves. Farron, you want to go for it?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Appreciate it. Well, I just wanted to welcome everyone and say thank you. And it's like I was just saying earlier, I'm happy to see everyone's faces and I'm glad you could join us. I'm really excited for this webinar. This is roughly 2 years in the making. And I am excited to be where we are at this stage. And I think there's some interesting findings. And I think some of this information will be really useful for outdoor education, both in terms of grant writing and supporting grant activities. I think it will be informative and useful for marketing and research and kind of targeted communication. I think there's opportunities here to connect wildlife viewing with access and habitat priorities for the agency. And I think there's opportunities here to explore additionally, funding mechanisms. It's a really important constituency in the state of South Dakota. And I'm excited we're here. And just to give you all a little bit of a background, so this isn't the first time GFP has done this. We have a good history. So this is roughly starting in early 2000s, Gelati did a study and then he followed it up again in 2012. And so this is falling in really nicely in that roughly 10-year cycle, which is perfect. And it also was just serendipitously just ahead of an economic assessment study that Southwick did as well, and included some wildlife viewing work. So it was really great timing in that respect. And as you all know, South Dakota is one of the fastest growing states in the upper Midwest, particularly Sioux Falls and Rapid City. And with that growth, which is wonderful, brings new people, but new people may have different wildlife values. They may have different expectations about accessing and supporting wildlife conservation. So that's a really important constituency for the agency, and there's so much opportunity here. So I will turn it over to Emily and Ashley and let them share everything.
Great. I turned off my share screen there so we could see Farron's face a little bit bigger. Let's do this. Am I good to go now on the right slide, Emily? Okay, awesome. So great to have you all here, and nice to have Farron along as well. She's been a great help on this survey effort, as you'll see a little bit later on. In South Dakota, she was more involved as a human dimensions specialist than in some of our other states, and actually implemented the survey that we had designed. So it was a nice partnership to be able to do that together, and know Farron well from her time at Virginia Tech before she came and joined you all in South Dakota too. So let me introduce us here, and then we can get rolling. First thing I want to say is the presentation is going to be focused on your survey report. We have drafted that has been reviewed. We are in the final stages of putting the finishing touches on and putting it online. And so when we send to you a recording of this webinar next week, as well as follow-up materials for the things that we put in the chat, you will also have a link to the full report. And as you can see there, thanks to Farron for also being a co-author on that. So the team that worked on this project is myself, Ashley Dare. I'm an associate professor at Virginia Tech in the Department of Fish and Wildlife Conservation. I was able to work with the Wildlife Viewing and Nature Tourism Working Group to get funding for a multi-state project, which is how we then spun off and had these state-specific projects. So that's how I had a relationship with you all to work on this. Additionally, Emily's here today. She is the lead author on this report. She's a master's student who's been working heavily on this project for the last 1.5 years, and it's also the source of her thesis data. Christy Patotsky is a PhD student in our lab. She also worked considerably and in close collaboration with Emily on all of the state reports. And then we have a broader team of folks who worked on our national and regional report as well. So let me show you what we hope to accomplish here today. And of course, I already acknowledged Farron, but there she is with her professional headshot. All right, so today in the webinar, we hope to focus in on key survey findings that we think will be of interest to you all, providing a profile of wildlife viewers in South Dakota, and then really digging in on a few key things. One, how can your agency support wildlife viewers build a stronger relationship with wildlife viewers? How can you broaden relevance to wildlife viewers who may not already be hunting and fishing, and maybe, like Farron's saying, sort of that newer group of people that your state may not have as strong a relationship with yet? And then develop financial support opportunities for wildlife viewers to also contribute to the agency. So those are the things we're going to emphasize. I will say now and several times throughout this presentation, the report is extensive and we can't do it justice in 40 minutes, which is, or I guess 45 minutes or so, which is how long we plan to be talking here, and then have time for questions. But we really encourage you to think about, as we go through the presentation, which parts of this are really relevant to your work. What would you want to go back and actually look more closely at the specific data or graph that's associated with it. And there's also tables with all of the specific numbers for every single graph that we have in here too, if you want to get into the nitty-gritties. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how we got involved in this wildlife viewer study, why state agencies were interested in this work. First, I want to make sure we're on the same page about what we mean by wildlife viewers. We provided a definition at the beginning of our survey to make sure that our respondents were also on the same page as us about what we mean by wildlife viewers. And so that was closely observing, feeding, and photographing wildlife, visiting parks or natural areas to observe, feed, or photograph wildlife, and maintaining plantings in natural areas for the benefit of wildlife. This definition was based upon the National Survey of Hunting, Fishing, and Wildlife-Related Recreation. And so we tried to be consistent with that. Some of the states were concerned that feeding was in there because their state may not be in support of feeding, and we definitely understand that. But because that's been broadly part of the definition of viewing and assessed in these other surveys, we kept it in here, but you'll be able to see that we provide a breakdown of how many people are actually feeding wildlife as opposed to the other types of wildlife viewing. Also want to make sure that it's clear to you, and we hoped that it was clear to our survey respondents as well, that we were really looking at that purposeful or intentional wildlife viewing, again, like the National Survey has defined it. So simply noticing wildlife while someone was doing something else, like gardening, exercising, hunting, or fishing, or intentionally scouting for game, was not something that we considered wildlife viewing. So we wanted them to be thinking about when they were truly out there focused on wildlife viewing, as opposed to it just being like, oh, a squirrel ran by me right now. Now I'm a wildlife viewer. So the basis for this work, and I'm sure you all are familiar with it as well, is that wildlife viewing is growing in popularity across the US, across many of the states. The 2011 numbers, which I know are a little bit dated right now, is that there was 384,000 adults in South Dakota that viewed wildlife. Nationally, there's about a third of the population that views wildlife. And in fact, between 2011 and 2016, the participation rate increased by 14 million additional viewers. And that rise in viewing, which also tracks across most of the states, was in around the home viewing. So viewing that people did within a mile of their house. And again, this is all coming from the National Survey. At the same time, in a lot of states, hunting and angling rates are declining or remaining stable. So the states were very interested through AFWA in us pursuing this wildlife viewing study with a recognition that there's a growing population, a group of people that they could really think about how can we be relevant to this broad interest in wildlife recreation in our state, and what exactly is that interest? When we were working with the states on this survey, and Farron was the representative from your state, and we had about 20 other state representatives involved, we asked them, why are you interested in us doing this survey? So this piece that I just shared with you of the growing number of viewers and the potential influence they might have came up again and again. But we also heard that state agencies have some difficulty reaching out to viewers and trying to figure out what's the appropriate way to contact them, which was something that we also had lots of conversations with Farron about in South Dakota as well. You have a hunting license database, you have a fishing database, so you clearly can find those types of recreationists, but where do you find the viewer database to conduct a survey? There's also a lack of information on viewers' thoughts, preferences, and behaviors in a lot of the states. The National Survey has done a great job of providing information about extent of participation, about financial support of people who participate, but doesn't dig in on things like what's the relationship between a state agency and viewers. A lot of the state agencies said they're interested in better serving and communicating with viewers and other underserved groups that may be more interested in viewing than other types of wildlife-related recreation. And then finally, a lot of states were interested in how could they connect viewers to mechanisms to contribute financially. There's obvious ways that hunters and anglers can support state agencies, and it may not be as clear to viewers, or there may not be a mechanism that resonates as much for them. So we looked into that as well. And you all might have other reasons that you're interested in these results. Feel free to throw them in the chat. It's always interesting to us to see, and we'll take a glance over there and make sure that we hit on them as we go through the presentation. But if there's other reasons that you've come here today, certainly do let us know. So I just gave you a really brief overview on what's known about wildlife viewers, mostly those participation numbers, but we also did a literature review at the beginning of this project. Emily and then Kelsey, another master's student, took the lead on it. And they went through all the studies that they could find about wildlife viewers, particularly in the US, but also expanded it beyond that. And they distilled it into a really easy to read, pretty short document under key headings like, who are wildlife viewers? What's of interest to wildlife viewers? What are the conservation behaviors of wildlife viewers? So I encourage you to take a look at that. It saves you the trouble of having to go through the literature yourself, but then also if there is something that you want to take a closer look at, there's the reference list in the back. And certainly do reach out to us if there's something that you can't get a hold of. And then I did want to mention to people too that there is the national and regional survey results that we've already published and had a webinar on a few months ago. If you're interested in the context of where South Dakota sits compared to the region that you're in or the whole nation, feel free to take a look in there. Or if you have colleagues in other states who might benefit from this data, but their state wasn't one of the 15, which Emily will show you that list here in a second, one of the 15 that had state-specific data, you could encourage them to take a look at it. And then the last reason that it might be relevant to you is today we're going to show you a few examples of what other states are doing that could be really useful things to pursue given the results that we found. And those are actually documented pretty thoroughly in 2-page write-ups in the recommendations section of the national and regional report. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn things over to Emily, who's going to tell you about how we did this survey.
Thank you for the introduction, Ashley and Farron. I was really excited when I learned that South Dakota would be one of the states that we were surveying for this effort, as my dad was actually born in Dallas, South Dakota, which is a very small town near Gregory, South Dakota. Some of the pictures you'll see in the PowerPoint are from his most recent hunting trip home with our family on the farm out there. And with that, I'll go into sharing a little bit more details about that survey instrument and our administration. This was an oversampling effort. Part of a larger survey effort throughout the country. Many of the states used a Qualtrics panel format, which is a little bit different of a platform. Here in South Dakota, we worked with Farron, who pulled a list of survey takers online from the GFP camping registration database in 2021, which consisted of about 15,000 emails. She randomly selected a number of potential survey takers to send the emails to and sent them a detailed email explaining how she got their email from the camping database, the goal of the survey, and a little bit more information about GFP. Once all the survey sampling closed, she received 617 surveys back, with 463 fully completed surveys that were in line with some attention checks, so making sure people weren't selecting contrary statements and just paying attention throughout the survey. You may also have some questions about our sample size, just to share a little bit about that confidence interval with you. With our sample size of 463 respondents from South Dakota and an estimated population of about 384,000 wildlife viewers in South Dakota, our margin of error is about 4.5%, which means all the numbers that you see here in the presentation and in the report kind of have that error of like 10% plus or minus 4.5% for our estimation. And the survey opened with a screening question asking people which, if any, of the following forms of wildlife viewing have you participated in the past 5 years. These are those behaviors like feeding wildlife, feeding wild birds, closely observing wildlife, or photographing or taking pictures of wildlife. If people said, hey, I didn't participate in any of these activities, they were then removed from the survey. As what Ashley said earlier, we were really focused on understanding just wildlife viewers in South Dakota, not those who may just witness the casual squirrel. The survey covered a lot of different questions about wildlife viewing. We were interested in their demographic characteristics, their viewing behaviors and interests, so what types of wildlife they view, their duration, location, and frequency of participation in wildlife viewing, both around their home and away from home, which means 1 mile or more, their participation in other forms of outdoor recreation, their level of specialization, so their skill level, how do they own or rent equipment for wildlife viewing. We briefly looked at their viewing related expenditures, so how much they may spend on trips for wildlife viewing or for those equipments and other objects. We also examined their barriers and social support and participation. So looking at how do friends, family, or mentors influence participation in wildlife viewing. We were also interested in their likelihood of participating in conservation behaviors, such as picking up trash or litter, or maybe civic engagement. The survey also took a close look at the relationship that wildlife viewers have with the GFP. We examined their familiarity with, perceptions of, and trust in the GFP, and their experience with GFP programs and services. And here I'll just take a moment to remind you that because we pulled these survey takers from the camping database, they did have really high levels of participation in camping, and they were pretty familiar with the GFP. We also examined their past financial contributions to GFP and their likelihood to support GFP financially and through conservation behaviors in the future. We also took a look at what would influence them to contribute more to the GFP through things like habitat conservation. And finally, we examined their preferred forms of viewing support and communication, so how they want to receive information from GFP. And once Farron finished collecting that survey data and had all of those respondents and all of those answers, she cleaned the data and then sent it to us at Virginia Tech. We then conducted some analysis in SPSS, which is the statistical package for social science. We primarily use chi-square tests and t-tests to explore the differences among consumptive and non-consumptive viewers in South Dakota. With that, we'll define these non-consumptive and consumptive wildlife viewers. Now, before I came to this project, when I would think of a consumptive wildlife viewer or someone who participated in hunting, trapping, or fishing, I kind of would picture these hunters and anglers over here and wildlife viewers over here. And I kind of saw them as two separate groups. But what we're really starting to see through this survey is there's a lot of wildlife viewers who are also those hunters, anglers, or trappers. And so when we present results today, you're going to see the purple group, and those are the non-consumptive wildlife viewers. So they don't participate in hunting, angling, or trapping. And that lime green group is going to be consumptive wildlife viewers who have participated in hunting, trapping, or fishing. Specifically from our sample in South Dakota, we found that about 23% of respondents were non-consumptive wildlife viewers, and 77%, or over 3/4, were consumptive wildlife viewers. So they participated in some form of a combination of these activities. Specifically, we found that 21% of our sample of viewers in South Dakota comprised of only anglers and wildlife viewers. 3% of respondents participated in hunting and wildlife viewing. 47%, or just about half of all the respondents, participated in fishing, hunting, and wildlife viewing. And 6% of respondents were really busy and participated in fishing, hunting, trapping, and wildlife viewing. And none of our survey respondents said that they only participated in trapping. All of the trappers were also hunters and anglers. So I want to take a moment to see how does this compare to licensed sales in South Dakota. So according to 2021, 19.5% of residents in South Dakota have purchased a fishing and or hunting license. So this sample you'll see here in our survey is skewing a little bit more towards that group, that 19.5% of residents who are consumptive viewers. So that purple group that we'll be looking at, our non-consumptive viewers, is a little bit more representative of the state, as the majority of the state residents are non-consumptive. And now I'll just share a few quick demographics of our wildlife viewers in South Dakota before going into the results with Ashley. So the mean age of survey takers was 55 years old. They were primarily men, just about 63% were men and 35% women. And 22%, or just about a quarter of them, had received greater than 4 years of higher education. We also examined their ethno-racial identity, and we found that about 96% of respondents in South Dakota who are wildlife viewers were white, which meant that they were white alone, excluding being Hispanic or Latino, and 4.3% were BIPOC, meaning they were Black, Indigenous, or people of colors, so another ethno-racial identity or potentially combined with white. And according to the U.S. Census 2020 report, about 80% of residents in South Dakota are white only. So this sample was slightly less diverse than what we see in the state as a whole. However, when we examined our household income, that was much more aligned with what we've seen in the census and the general population of South Dakota. About 3/4 of our respondents reported their total household income as $50,000 or higher. And in the census, 62% of the residents in South Dakota reported their income at $50,000 or higher. This next graph here is the first graph with that breakdown of our green and purple groups, so those consumptive and non-consumptive viewers. We asked respondents which of the following best describes where you currently live, looking at urban areas, small cities, small towns, and rural areas. We found that over half of all respondents statewide indicated they lived in a small city or urban area. And there was a statistically significant difference between consumptive and non-consumptive groups, and slightly more consumptive wildlife viewers lived in rural areas than non-consumptives. We also asked wildlife viewers what were their forms of wildlife viewing that they participated in. We found that the most common form of wildlife viewing was visiting parks and natural areas for the purpose of feeding, observing, or photographing wildlife. With that, I'll pause here and do a little mini survey with you all and launch our poll to see which wildlife viewing behaviors that you all launch this. So this is a quick little survey we put together, just asking you which are your favorite forms of wildlife viewing participation ways to participate in it. And if you see the poll, you can just go ahead and select which behaviors that you like to participate in, so we can do a quick comparison to see people with and people in the survey and people in the webinar. So I'll leave that open for just about 30 more seconds if you can just pick what's most important or your favorite form of activity. So we're seeing a lot of people taking trips or outings and visiting parks and natural areas. Looks like just about half of everybody's participated. So I'll go ahead and end this poll and let's see how we compare. So share results. All right. Can you all see the poll results? Can someone? Okay. So here we found that everybody participating in this webinar today, similar to the wildlife viewers in South Dakota, also like participating in wildlife viewing by visiting parks or natural areas, but you all are a little bit less interested in photographing wildlife than our sample in South Dakota, with only 11% participating in that. Thanks, everybody. With that, we also wanted to take a look at what types of wildlife viewers in South Dakota like to view. And we found that both consumptive and non-consumptive viewers in South Dakota were most interested in viewing land mammals, with 90% of respondents statewide saying they're interested in viewing them, and birds, with 82% of respondents statewide saying they were interested in viewing them. And with that, I'm going to pass things back to Ashley, who's going to start going to an overview of our 5 key insights and discussion from the survey.
Thanks, Emily. And thanks for sharing that poll. It's always fun to see how we have comparisons with the general public who's involved in recreation. Okay, so 5 key insights. We have organized the results that we're sharing with you here today by key things that we think that most state agency staff would want to walk away from our webinar with keeping in mind. In the report, it goes section by section as it did in the survey, and then we have a final recommendation section, but that's just too much for us to cover here today. So you'll see some things woven in, and we hope that that's an easier way for you to walk away from the webinar with some ideas about what you might do in your own work as a result of these findings. So the 5 key insights that we're going to cover here today are, first, that if South Dakota is thinking about how to better support wildlife viewers, they could think about providing more wildlife viewing information and access. And you'll see exactly why we suggest that. 2, thinking about promoting around the home viewing opportunities. 3, developing social support networks for wildlife viewers. And then additionally, we would recommend that GFP focus on broadening relevance to wildlife viewers who do not hunt and fish, and we'll cover how you could do that if that's of interest to you, and then develop financial contribution opportunities for wildlife viewers. And I see that David asked a question about what other options were people given for what types of wildlife they're interested in viewing. And we can come back to that in the end. Maybe Emily, you could take a screenshot of that graph from the report and throw it into the chat pod at some point. Oh, she's already on it. She put the text from the report in there. Okay, so in terms of providing information and access, we gave people a whole slew of options for what the state agency could do to support them in wildlife viewing. And I'll show you that whole list here in a minute. But what I wanted to point out are the top 5 items. And you see the word information over and over again here. So the top things that people were interested in were more information about where to go see wildlife, more information about wildlife in South Dakota, more information about where and when to view wildlife where there's no hunting, and more information about how to be viewing wildlife. And then additionally, there was an option related to access to more places to view wildlife, and that came up as well, which we'll reflect on that in a moment here. So here's the full list. And again, it's shown to you with the consumptive viewer, those people who hunt, fish, and or trap and also view, and compared to in purple, people who just wildlife view. And you can see that both consumptive and non-consumptive viewers want more support and the same kinds of support. Interestingly, though, in your state, it really stands out that non-consumptive viewers are even more pronounced in asking for more programming related to viewing from the state agency. So I think that that's really important as we come back later on and talk about ways that you could reach this group if you're trying to broaden your relevance to more people in the state. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about viewing information and how to provide that to the agency. You all have, it looks like, a good potential or already opportunity to be partnering with the tourism industry. The Department of Tourism certainly could be contributing to this, and I see that you're already calling it out on your website as things that people can do. You've got some wildlife watching tips, and you also provide some connection to where people can go bird watching as well, additionally, beyond that wildlife watching specifically. Also wanted to mention that you could, I see yours falls under the things to do. You could think about what some states are doing where they actually have viewing as one of those key options up at the top in their menus. So it's not within a bunch of other things to do, but someone can come to your website and immediately say, yeah, this agency supports wildlife viewing and shows me how to do wildlife or how to approach wildlife viewing in my state. And you can see in Virginia here, they have a section on where to view wildlife, which then goes to maps and their birding trail and wildlife trail, as well as eBird related pages and wildlife management areas. Birding basics, similar to what you all offer on how to view wildlife, talks about festivals, and then it also talks about wildlife cameras as a way to view wildlife from home. So those are all some ideas that you could think about. And I just would recommend the key thing of considering, can you make it even more prominent on your website, since people are really saying we want to be able to get this information from the agency. Another thing to keep in mind is that one of the reasons why getting more information may be top of the list here is that a lot of these viewers identified as beginners and novice. So you can see more than 50% of non-consumptive viewers and a little bit less than 50% of consumptive viewers said, yeah, we're a beginner or novice viewer. And we allow them to self-identify on this list. You can see that the consumptive viewers have more people in the intermediate category, but then we've lumped advanced and experts here. Were two different options. And for both groups, it's pretty small. So, this can be surprising sometimes to agencies because oftentimes when you think of viewers, you think of groups like the Audubon Society or the local bird club, where you are often talking to people who are more on the advanced or expert side. But if we're broadly talking about viewers in South Dakota, who your agency might be interested in connecting with, it's much more of that beginner or novice level or potentially intermediate level. So thinking about that as you provide information can be useful. In terms of how people wanted to receive information, the website came up as top. So that's why we were pointing out the website previously. Then email updates, it's tied right there with the website. And then printed materials as well was still very much of interest in South Dakota. And I'm going to show you the whole list here for people who are interested in seeing that. You can see the three that I just mentioned, the website, the newsletter, and the printed materials. Local news is really high up here in South Dakota. This is higher than most of our other states. And many other states, Facebook came before local news, but you all have local news up there before Facebook. And then all the way down to some more innovative, newer methods that like your friends over in Oklahoma are trying by doing a lot of social media. And even thinking about things like TikTok. And I would suspect that there's probably some age differences here. We haven't evaluated that in every state, but certainly something that if you have any communications staff who are interested in looking at this more could play around with the data set. All right, so the last part I want to talk about was that percentage of people that said they wanted improved access. And what we don't really know is, do they want more access because the access doesn't exist or because they don't know where to access? Because we also said they want more information about where to view wildlife. So I think that's an important thing for you all to think about as you think about these results. You do have a trail for birding. And are people aware of this? Does it have extensive coverage in the state? Are those in areas that are easy for people to get to from major population centers? And then, of course, there's, I think, much potential for promoting viewing on privately managed lands of people who are collaborating with your agency, given that your state is so largely a private land state. We also looked at what was the barriers for people getting involved in wildlife viewing, and lack of free time and distance to viewing locations came up as really high. And I just want to reflect on that part first. So this gets back at the access piece. Possibly there are challenges that people are facing in getting to locations, or they're not aware of the locations that are near them. And so that might be something to focus on if people are struggling to have the time to actually travel to wildlife viewing locations. And then the third place one, which was pretty low, only 25% of people were saying this, were crowds and viewing locations and then not knowing where to go viewing wildlife. So they again were bringing up that issue as well. So I think all of this points to the real need to get out the word about where people can go wildlife viewing in South Dakota. All right, so in terms of promoting around the home viewing, I did also mention that distance piece and also the components of needing to have it closer to home. So certainly this may be a really good opportunity to focus in on around the home viewing. And so Emily's going to talk about that here and cover how that might be an option for you.
Great. Thanks, Ashley. I'm back for a few more sections. First, with around the home viewing, we did ask wildlife viewers in South Dakota where they participate in wildlife viewing. We found that the majority of respondents, again, about 90% of them, participated in wildlife viewing on state managed areas. And I'll just pause here and note that that likely might be partially because we did survey people who already had those existing relationships with wildlife viewers, with you all, the GFP in South Dakota. But our next most common location of wildlife viewing was around my own home or property, where we had about 80% of respondents statewide say they participated in that. And kind of with that in mind, we wanted to dig in a little bit on what does managing for around the home viewing look like and how can we support that more. So one recommendation or idea that we came up with was the importance of sharing information to target small scale backyard wildlife viewing and habitat management. A lot of agencies, including GFP, have lots of information kind of targeted towards those bigger landowners, the ranchers. And here in the GFP, I believe you have already got a little bit of information about managing for wildlife around home. And we suggest that there's opportunities to increase that communication and really focus on those little smaller scale things that people could do in a residential neighborhood or types of bird feeding that can help them participate in wildlife viewing at home, particularly for those who live in those urban areas. This is also connected to just forms of conservation behaviors with or in support of GFP. We've know from the literature that wildlife viewers tend to be conservationists and they're a little bit more likely to engage in these conservation behaviors than people who are not wildlife viewers or wildlife related recreationists. There were 3 wildlife viewing conservation related behaviors connected to habitat that we surveyed viewers about, including cleaning up trash or litter, enhancing wildlife habitat, and collecting data on wildlife or habitat, similar to community or citizen science. And we found that the top 3 behaviors that wildlife viewers were most likely to participate in with the GFP were cleaning up trash or litter, participating in civic engagement. So this might be voting or contacting agency representatives related to wildlife viewing, or purchasing products that benefit wildlife. And when we're talking about that, cleaning up trash or litter, we just wanted to pause here and note that that may be another opportunity for the agency to develop an event, maybe a pickup my local creek or an area day, where you could bring in people from the public to participate in this cleanup and then share a little bit of information with them about wildlife viewing in general and how that's something they could become connected with. And we also wanted to examine the social support networks for wildlife viewers, which is related to our third primary takeaway from this research. And we surveyed wildlife viewers in South Dakota about their perceived social support from family, friends, peers, and mentors. And we found that family and friends provided that most significant form of social support for wildlife viewing. So maybe they participate in the activity with the wildlife viewer, or they're just very encouraging of them. There wasn't as much support provided by peers or mentors, which is one area that we identified that GFP may work to step in by kind of fostering a little bit of that mentorship role in wildlife viewing. Another form of social support that we examined in South Dakota was looking at accessibility challenges and the disabilities. So we surveyed wildlife viewers and asked them, to what extent do you experience accessibility challenges? We defined accessibility challenges as the difficulties someone experiences in interacting with or while using the physical or social environment while trying to engage in a meaningful activity such as wildlife viewing. This may be a result of a mobility challenge, blindness or low vision, intellectual or developmental disabilities, mental illness, being deaf or hard of hearing, or other health concerns. And this is something that we spotlighted because according to the CDC, about 1 in 3 adult Americans live with some form of a disability. So it's important to consider these people in mind as potential wildlife viewers. Here in South Dakota, we found that only 12% of wildlife viewers experience somewhat, quite a bit, or a great deal of accessibility challenges with wildlife viewing. One way to potentially connect more with this important audience might be to spotlight accessible birding and wildlife viewing locations in South Dakota. I'll share a link with you momentarily, about this, but Birdability is one organization that's worked in partnership with Audubon to spotlight accessible birding locations throughout the country. It supports this user-based map in which participants can find a birding trail or wildlife viewing trail, and they'll say why it's accessible and just post it up there for everyone to see. So one way that you could potentially connect more with birders with disabilities or wildlife viewers with disabilities would be to spotlight your trails in South Dakota that are already accessible to potentially draw in a little bit more of this audience. And another key constituency to connect to is BIPOC viewers in South Dakota. Remember, those are people who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And as we talked about earlier, only 5% of this sample was BIPOC compared to about 19% who were BIPOC according to the 2020 US Census in South Dakota. One reason that we might see less diversity in wildlife viewing is the don't loop, which is a principle that says if you don't meet others who are engaged in a particular activity like you, the odds are that you will not take interest in the activity yourself. This is one area where the GFB can consider that mentorship role. One example that in the state that we've worked with is from South Carolina, who in 2015, they began community engagement by hiring a Hispanic outreach coordinator who developed bilingual resources and outreach strategies to connect with a very large Hispanic population in South Dakota. After about 6 years of this program, it was such a large success that they began a similar program to reach the Black population in the state. Now, what might that look like in South Dakota? As I've talked a lot with Farron, I know that you guys already have some really great programs going with Hunt 101, and I believe Fishing with Friends. And one thing that we suggest is developing a similar program that instead of being targeted towards hunting or fishing could be targeted towards wildlife viewing. And a great location to consider piloting or anchoring these programs could be at your outdoor campus locations, which are generally near those more dense population areas of South Dakota, where we know it's a little bit more dense than, it has a little bit higher ethno-racial diversity, than we see in kind of those rural and less populated areas of South Dakota. And with that, I'm going to pass things back to Ashley for our last 2 points and then to wrap up the presentation.
Thanks, Emily. All right, so let's talk about broadening relevance to wildlife viewers who do not hunt and fish. And we know in the sample that we received from the camping database that the percentage here was not extremely high, but that could be because we were looking at people who already had a connection to the agency. Yet still, we think it's important for us to think about and specifically focus in on what the non-consumptive viewers' thoughts were, because there were still differences, even though they already had a connection with your agency through having camped in the past. And we might expect that that could be even more pronounced if we looked at people who hadn't been camping before. And we see across the board that the non-consumptive viewers show that there might be a need to increase their basic familiarity and connection with GFP and provide even more tailored support. So if we look at the specific or this broad question that we asked of how familiar are you with the GFP, you can see that the folks that fall within that non-consumptive group or the purple group have a lighter color shade of gray, which means that they have less familiarity. If we look at the consumptive viewers, you have about 50% of people saying they're very familiar, extremely familiar with the agency, where it's only about 35% if we look at the non-consumptive viewers. And then in terms of which programs or services people have participated in the past, we actually don't see many differences here between the two groups. And again, we might expect that this is because we were looking at people just within the camping database. In other states where we were able to use that Qualtrics sample, which unfortunately they weren't able to draw enough people in South Dakota, we actually saw more pronounced differences here across the groups. The ones that we do see here that are differences are ones that you'd expect. So people having an interaction with and experience with conservation officers, much higher for consumptive viewers than for non-consumptive viewers. And that might be what we'd expect, as well as more visitation to nature centers and educational centers being higher for the non-consumptive viewers. Now let's talk a little bit about funding opportunities and ways that consumptive viewers and non-consumptive viewers connect with the agency. We looked at two different types or broad categories of funding that may be available or options for people to give money to the agency. One being non-voluntary contributions. So those are things where you have to give money to the agency in order to be able to do X, Y, or Z. So more of the fees or licenses. And they are required for you to be able to do that. Whereas voluntary contributions are things where you can make a decision about whether or not you're going to support the agency in a certain way, like a conservation license plate. And it's not required for you to be supporting the agency in that way. So focusing first on the non-voluntary contribution options, see that we have a lot of participation here from this group in fishing licenses when it comes to the consumptive viewers. Non-consumptive viewers, the people who don't hunt or fish, was much lower, but we still have about 30% of them having purchased a fishing license in the past 5 years. We don't think this is because they're lying to us. We think instead that it could be because they're purchasing a fishing license for someone else in their family, but they themselves don't actually fish. So that's why they told us they didn't previously in the survey. Or it could be because in some states, people have been encouraged to buy a fishing license as a way that they can contribute to the state, or as the way that they can get access to some of the state lands. I don't know if either of those are potentially a rationale in your state for these differences, but we saw this difference across the board in states. So I think it's an interesting point that there's could be a strong tie, even with those non-consumptive viewers, with fishing licenses. Then we also see that lands access permits and entrance fees are higher for the non-consumptive viewers. And then otherwise, hunting licenses much higher for consumptive viewers, and the required conservation or habitat stamp much higher for consumptive viewers. Again, you'd expect that because these non-voluntary mechanisms are primarily targeting consumptive viewers, except for that lands access fee. Then for non-voluntary contributions, first thing I'd note when I look at this graph is all the percentages are lower. Everything is at about 30% or lower. So the voluntary opportunities are not being utilized as much. And I'm sure you all are aware of that as well. People saying that they buy tangible products from your agency, about 30% of both consumptive and non-consumptive viewers. This is higher than what we saw in some of the states. And I would expect, again, it's because we have the camping license database participants here being the ones that we surveyed. Raffle tickets for where the proceeds go to habitat conservation, much higher for consumptive group, and voluntary conservation or habitat stamp also much higher. So it doesn't really seem like there's a mechanism that's resonating more with the non-consumptive viewer than consumptive viewer here, although we did see it back here with the lands access pass and fee. All right, so we're going to give you a chance here to hypothesize about what you think. Emily, do you have a poll that you're going to pull up for me?
We're going to put it in the chat.
Okay, so you can put this in the chat. Tell us what you think the percentage of wildlife viewers are who responded to about right. We gave them the question of, what are your thoughts about how the agency currently prioritizes programs and services that support wildlife viewing? And the example that we have in here is Florida, but of course in your state, the survey was specific to South Dakota. So do you think that they think about these options here? They were given far too low, about right, too high, and far too high. What percentage of them do you think were picking about right? So answer, what percentage do you think said about right? I see most of you think it's too low, but what percentage do you think we're on the about right front? Okay, Farron's going with 15%. She thinks we're about right. David's a little bit higher. Looks like most of you are coming in at about 15 or 20%, thinking that what you're doing for viewers is about right. Well, they're happier with what you all are doing, what you're thinking that they're going to respond. So the about right here is in gray. And we actually had quite a few respondents saying that what they think they're doing for wildlife viewers is about right. But many also saying that they felt it's too low or far too low. So about a third of the non-consumptive viewers, and about a little bit more than that of a little bit less than that, sorry, of the consumptive viewers. So there certainly would be support, it looks like, amongst a lot of people. And it's notable that very few people said it's too high or far too high. And those who did were in the consumptive viewer category. All right, so going back to these financial opportunities and thinking about what you could do in the future, in addition to asking people what they've done in the past as a way to look at what their relationship was with the agency currently, we asked them what sort of interest do they have in contributing in these various ways to the agency in the future. And in this question, we gave them all the options. The previous question, we had sorted it just for those that might be available in the given state that we were reaching out to their participants. So, and then we also gave them the option to answer not at all likely, somewhat likely, moderately, very, extremely likely. So we've lumped together everybody who said moderately, very, or extremely likely here. And there's good news. There's lots of interest in people contributing, much higher than what actually has been the level of contribution in the past. So the lands access pass being the highest percentage, 90% of people saying that they had an interest there. Now, of course, these are people who've been going to your campgrounds, probably been going to state parks too. So people who are interested in contributing to your agency in that way. Fishing license also extremely high. It's 84% of people are saying this. So this is getting a lot of that non-consumptive group saying that they're also interested in fishing licenses in the future. And then hunting license or required habitat stamp. And then in terms of the voluntary opportunities, tangible products were most of interest, but only 55% of people. So the numbers are lower here than those non-voluntary options that you have. There was a tie for second place with a conservation lottery ticket or a raffle ticket opportunity. And then conservation habitat stamp that was voluntary was about 40% of people being interested in it. So again, we've still got about half of the people responding saying that they'd be interested in these opportunities, but not quite as high as the non-voluntary options. We did want to call out that some states are trying some various new donation methods to try to get a specific opportunity out there for people who view wildlife and don't hunt or fish. And so in Virginia, for example, they have a Restore the Wild program now, which is modeled around sort of like a nonprofit membership where you get benefits from that nonprofit, but you're also really just contributing money as a donation. And so they've really focused this on wildlife viewers. And so something like this could be an opportunity to consider in your state, although it does look like your voluntary opportunities are also ones that could be very much of interest to people. One thing that we found across the board when we asked people about what would increase their contributions to the agency is that they really were interested in knowing where their funds would go. And so if they knew for sure that the fund was going to go to habitat conservation or conservation of preferred viewing species, then they said they'd be more likely to give more money. So I think to the extent that you can emphasize where funds are used and then even report back to people on how they were used, that will be valuable to you. So they're doing that in Virginia, and they've also given different donation levels to states as well. To participants as well. Sorry, I was simultaneously reading what David was writing. All right, so in terms of what's next, we have fortunately heard that we're going to be getting a phase 2 grant for this project from the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. And that multi-state grant, or I should say it's from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but we've heard from the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies that we were approved by the state directors, and it's now going through review from Fish and Wildlife Service. And that multi-state grant has several different components to it, and all of these are free to states. There's no need for you to pay at all to be involved as a state agency. We're going to be distributing results even further at workshops, conferences, and meetings. Given the desire from a lot of state agency staff who do work on wildlife viewing to make sure that their colleagues in all different components of the agency are aware of these results, especially in the states that aren't getting these state-specific survey presentations like you're receiving today. We were going to be supporting a community of practice with agencies who want to implement the survey results. So we heard from a lot of the states that they'd really appreciate having both their colleagues and us at Virginia Tech involved in working through how they can implement results and supporting them on their first projects to do so. So we are having a community of practice where states can opt in, and we're hoping to get at least half of the states in the US involved to come up with a specific project that they would like to work on over the course of next year. And we'll coach them through that process through monthly meetings and resources to them. And we'll have an in-person meeting as well at the Pathways Conference that I'll talk about in a second here. I understand from Emily that you all have already signed up. So glad to hear that, and that we'll have a team from South Dakota involved. So thank you. We're also going to be developing a website with resources and examples, both the examples we've shared in the presentation today, the examples that are in our regional and national report, as well as the examples from the states that participate over the course of next year. And the hope with that is that other states then can go to that website and come up with their own take on what other states are doing. So we'll be fostering more ideas and also making sure that people don't have to recreate the wheel. They can contact another state who might be doing something that's of interest to them and learn from them. We're also going to be doing some additional analysis on rural and urban viewers as part of that survey. Emily's already doing more analysis as part of her thesis on accessibility challenges. And then there may be opportunities or desires from others or from you all on the call to look more at things like income level and how that might influence what we're seeing in terms of different responses, or levels of specialization, or how skilled viewers are, or the age of viewers. And you all do have your data set from this project. As we mentioned, Farron collected this data. And so it is a data set that the agency holds. And so anyone who wants to dig into it more would be able to. And we're thankful to Farron for making sure that we had it so that we could write this report and give the presentation for you. And as I mentioned, the Pathways Conference, which is a human dimensions conference held by Colorado State University, and then this year in collaboration with the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies and also us at Virginia Tech, is a great place to go to hear more about wildlife viewing, to hear more about this study as well. And then additionally, all of the states who are participating in the community of practice are going to be invited to a one-day workshop, likely the day before this conference starts, to work together on their projects that they're implementing. And we're going to be providing some support for travel for the states who do participate. This conference is focused this year on managing wildlife in an era of mutualism. And as I'm sure you all are aware from work by Mike Manfredo and Tara Teal and others, and I remember collaborating with you all on this back when I worked on the wildlife viewers in the West study many years ago, that mutualists are growing in population in states. And so these are people who have sort of a connection with wildlife, like it's an extension of their family, and they really want to care for and protect wildlife. And oftentimes those same people are people who are interested in viewing that the type of viewer that we call the non-consumptive viewer here is who we'd expect are also mutualists. So if you're interested in thinking more about how to broaden your relevance to that group of people, there's going to be a lot of presentations in that vein and a lot related to wildlife viewing at that conference. So in conclusion, just a reminder that this report is going to be coming your way next week as we have the final version available online. And thanks to Emily and Farron for all their work on it. And also for John for taking a look at it. And the key thing that I want to point out again related to the report is we've just touched on the surface of it here today. There's an executive summary in the beginning that I encourage you to take a look at. There's also a recommendations section near the end of the text that might be of interest to you. And then if any of the sections that we covered here today are really in line with your work or in line with the direction that you might want to go based upon the results, just flip to that part of the report and take a close look. So with that, I think we're at the end here. Here's contact information for me and for Emily. And feel free to reach out to us with any questions that we don't get to cover here today. I'd encourage you to reach out to Emily first, because I'm on sabbatical and my inbox is exploding as I try to focus on my research. We've also provided a brief evaluation survey link here that would be great to get your feedback on what you thought about our presentation today, and additionally how you might use these results. And that's been really helpful for us as we think about other presentations, and then also think about phase 2 of this project and ways that people are relating to the data and thinking about using the data. So while you start the evaluation survey, we will answer some questions. I want to start with one that I saw in the chat here that said, how many states are using these wildlife cameras? And I mentioned that as a way that people could connect with wildlife at home. I don't know the exact number of how many states are have these wildlife viewing cameras. I know that about 10 years ago, I believe it was Mark Duda's firm did an analysis of what do the wildlife viewing opportunities in each state look like. And that survey did sum up things like wildlife viewing cameras. I don't know if that specific question was in there, but that's about 10 years dated now. So I would guess that it's changed. One way that you could explore this more is if someone in your state wants to participate or may already be participating in the wildlife viewing and nature tourism working group, they meet monthly and have phone calls where wildlife viewing related program staff talk about things that are of interest to them. And it's very common for someone to come to it and say, hey, I'm wondering who else is doing this, and we'd like some info on what types of wildlife you're viewing. That can be a great way for you to learn about that. I know in Virginia, we have a falcon cam, we have an elk cam, and we also even have a fish cam. So those are the sorts of things that you could find out about by participating in that. So I assume Emily's probably going to put in the chat, if she hasn't already, a way to sign up for that working group. Oh yeah, she's provided the link to it, and Shelley Plant is the lead on that from Texas. All right, Farron want to know about the frequency of wildlife viewing, and wanting to know a wildlife viewer, but it's just that I did it once when I was camping. We do have that info, and we didn't show it here today. Emily, do you have it off the top of your head, or do you want me to take another question and you can bring it up while we're doing that?
You could take another question. I believe this was Lacey, who is also going by Farron's name right now.
Oh, okay, got it. Excellent. There's lots of Farron wannabes on this call. All right.
I wonder if it has something to do with me forwarding the link, which would be weird, but maybe that's what it is.
Yeah, for sure.
I clicked on the link that you sent, Farron, so I think that's why I'm you.
Yeah.
Be worse. I mean,
Farron, did you have any other questions that you wanted us to cover that you saw in here? I know that was one that I had seen.
No, I didn't. I think we did a good job because she is correct. There is an enormous amount of information in the report. Even the executive summary is multiple pages, and that's distilled down. So there is a lot of information, a lot of nuggets in there. And Emily's available, and you all can always reach out to me. You know that, and I'm happy to chat with you about anything that you see in the report or want to talk more about. So.
And Farron, I did see while you were saying that, so thank you. David asked a question about whether or not we were able to tell, was it viewing that leads to consumptive participation, or is it vice versa? And we don't know that. It would be fascinating to know. I recently had a similar conversation with Virginia DWR, because in their R3 plan, they actually make the assumption that wildlife viewing is sort of like the gateway to, like you're referring to, the gateway to consumptive participation, but they didn't have any empirical evidence beyond what they've heard anecdotally. So I think that's a great idea for some future research is to look at that.
And so I believe it was Lacey's question about wildlife viewing. We found that in a typical year, over half of the wildlife viewers participated in wildlife viewing for 30 days or more. So we do see a lot of them are saying they're intentionally doing this like multiple times a month. I think that is a good start.
Yeah, and definitely that might be something, Lacey, that you want to check out in the report. There's a variety of graphs that look at amount of viewing away from home, at home. And then because we did this during COVID, we had to ask questions like in a typical year, in the last year, because there were all those oddities of people working from home or stay-at-home orders, et cetera. But yeah, there's a lot of information about participation in there too. Any other questions? Okay, well then just a reminder, definitely give us some feedback. Emily put on that link up a few messages ago. And also we'll be getting out to you all on Monday or so, maybe Tuesday, some set of links that we've provided here, also the report, and then also a recording of the presentation. So feel free to pass that on to anyone else who you think might benefit from it in the agency as well. And we hope that it will be useful, and really looking forward to working with a subset of your staff on the implementation phase. So thanks again for signing up. And John, I see that you're off mute. Did you have something you wanted to say too?
Yeah, just thank you, Ashley and Emily. I appreciate this. And I think this gives us a good summary and kind of context of the report that'll be coming out. Many of these staff that are on here, I've sent the report for review. I also want to give a huge thanks to Farron. You guys realize she's moved on, but she's continued to support us here and make sure that we bring this to completion. And so really thank you so much, Farron, because we've struggled to replace her. We're still I'm interviewing tomorrow, and hopefully we'll find somebody that'll be able to fill her shoes. And I say that one to just as an update, but two, we'll want to get that individual in the loop here too, and carry some of this forward. I don't want to see this stuff just get shelved and put to the side. And I think there's been a lot of great discussion and questions here. In particular, I like what David brought up. That's really what we're interested on our education side for sure is, what kind of links can we make here to, one, getting people in the outdoors, of course, but to some of those consumptive uses, which is largely funds us currently, and we'll see what happens with RAWA here. But so great stuff, and it's really got my wheels spinning, and I appreciate the time here, and I'll look forward to having some discussions into the future.
Great, sounds good, John. And definitely one thing I didn't say to David's question, it seems like there's a strong connection between the viewing and the fishing, for sure. And lots of potential there on that front, given that, what was it, 84% of people who are viewers said they'd be interested in the future, which is more than are currently buying fishing licenses.
I'm still hung up on the fact that respondents selected watching fish as one of their primary wildlife species. And Emily and I talked about that for a long time, but whatever. But I would also wanted to say, in terms of the outdoor education campuses, this is probably also an opportunity to link up the really great benefit or resource that you guys provide in terms of people being able to check out or borrow or rent equipment. Again, that kind of that gateway, activity. And so if people don't, because so many of these folks identified as beginners or newbies, maybe they don't have field guides, and maybe they don't have binoculars, whereas obviously the folks who hunt and fish a lot probably do. But again, it says that new group. And so those might be some resources that, again, might be helpful, because you guys have some great wildlife that show up at the outdoor campuses. There's always some really cool waterfowl that migrate through, and it's a neat place to go see.
All right, Emily. I know crayfish aren't really fish, for anyone who's concerned that I just said that.
I'm a huge crayfish hunter, but I eat them too. So I look at them and I eat them. So just
Consumptive viewer.
Exactly. All right. Well, nice to spend some time with you all. Thanks again for your time, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. Take care.
Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.